You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do Mini. I'm your host, Abraham.
And I'm your host, Shane.
We are going to do a quick dive on a small topic that's just a little bit of fun, and today we're talking about how catnip works.
You know, I think about like cartoons I watched when I was a kid, and they were always reference catnip, and it was just basically like, they made it seem like it was just the cat was like super stoned the whole time when they were on it.
They made it seem cartoony, if you will.
It was very ridiculous, you know, like which cartoons are supposed to be serious.
I like to give little catnip toys to my cats, and I like to watch them roll around all bizarrely and have fun with it. And so it's kind of a thing. They look at it, bat it, rub on it, otherwise display a wide range of these high energy behaviors toward it. Have you ever had cats that you've given that catnip to?
I've never owned cats.
Okay.
I've never had cats. And that was a very specific rule in my house growing up.
Uh-oh.
My dad hated cats. And then my brother was like super allergic to cats. So like there was no way we could have ever had one.
I see.
My cousin did, though. My cousin had several of them. I remember there was Fathead and there was Thinhead. And they had several other ones. But I don't know that they ever gave them catnip. So I've never seen that in real life, really.
All right. Well, anyway, they do this thing. If they get catnip, they, as I said, will look at it, bat at it, rub on it, do all these sort of high energy things. Sometimes they'll jump around it and meow at it. And so the question here is, what's going on?
Yeah.
Why does this plant make them do that? What is happening to their brain? And an important question is it safe?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. So I think, you know, like all of our episodes, we should probably have some definitions. And so let's go ahead and define what catnip is. So catnip is Nepeta cataria, or other Nepeta species. So this catnip is actually a type of mint plant.
Yeah.
There are about 250 different varieties of mint that it might be, and is native to Europe and Asia and parts of Africa and was imported around the world. So catnip's mint.
Yeah. That's kind of a fact already that I did not know and was kind of surprised by going into this.
It's wild.
If you see it, it often appears as sort of a dark leafy green, not one you probably want to put in your salad. Well, you could actually. I mean, it's often dry and looks essentially like oregano. If you see it, it looks pretty much identical to that. And often it is stuffed into toys or snacks, compressed into a ball that's used as its own toy, or it's sold as an herb or powder that can be added to things.
I feel like the version I've seen has been like, it looks like oregano. It looks like seasoning.
Yeah.
That's mostly what I have seen. And so I don't know if that's the most common version of it, but that is the one I know. I'm familiar with that.
I'm actually not sure what the most common form is, but it certainly can come that way, and I have seen it that way for sure.
Now, interestingly, kittens up to 3 to 6 months old are actually insensitive to catnip and will have no reaction to it. And even then, only about 30 to 50% of cats will ever be sensitive to catnip, or at least will have little to no reaction, which I think is actually super fascinating given that there's an entire industry around this.
Right. The sensitivity to catnip seems to be largely genetic and inherited from parent traits, or at least that's what most scientists think right now. But a cat who is sensitive will, as described before, rub on the catnip, they'll roll on the catnip, they might flop their body onto the catnip, they might chew it or lick it, and they might even have this sort of spaced out look in their face, and they might even purr or growl or display some very mild forms of aggression if they're approached while they're interacting with catnip.
For some cats, it's like marijuana, and then other cats, it's like bath salts.
Sure.
I mean, that's obviously a gross exaggeration, but the effects of catnip last about 10 minutes on average. And although the cat may not return to totally normal behavior for about 30 minutes to a couple of hours, you can see that kind of happen every now and again. During that time, they also won't be interested or be reactive to catnip. So like while they're starting to recover and kind of do that, they're not going to react to it in a certain way. And after about 2 hours, they will respond to it again if it is presented. So once they get kind of like exposed to it and they're sensitive to it and they start reacting to it, they got to recover again before they can do it again. Almost like filling up your mana bar.
Exactly, yeah. So you have like this short window of time where it'll be super effective. After that, they will not really be interested in it for a couple of hours. And once that is sort of reset, then representing it means you'll get a similar effect again. Of course, like most things, you don't want to overdo it. They will often try and eat it, and high doses and frequent administration of it can make them sick. So don't make your cat sick. Mm-hmm. It is important to know, I think, that as far as safety, it is generally considered non-addictive and harmless.
That's good. So if left alone, catnip will eventually lose its potency. So if you have old catnip, just throw it away. Get rid of it. You don't need it. it's kind of like how medicine works. Like at a certain point in time, your medicine starts losing its like actual effectiveness. That's why medicine expires, right? It expires because at a certain point in time, it stops being as effective and doesn't work as well.
Yeah, chemicals break down. If you ever hear about half-life, it has to do with how long a chemical will last before it has broken down.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about sort of what it is, the effect that it has, how long the effect lasts, but why does catnip do this thing? Well, the primarily active ingredient in catnip is this volatile essential oil called nepetalactone, is how I'm going to read that word.
That was good.
Thank you. It felt smooth.
That was really smooth. You were talking and I was reading it and I was like, I don't know how to say that, and you nailed it. So nepetalactone. Now, the compound binds to protein receptors in the cat's nasal cavity, which stimulates the brain neurons, which activates the amygdala and hypothalamus through a neuroendocrine response through the pituitary gland. So lots of brain stuff. Basically, it gets in the nose and it activates and lights up all these parts of their brain and glands and hormones and stuff like that too. So these regions are associated with emotional, the amygdala part, and behavioral and sexual, hypothalamus, responses, which I think is interesting that they say, like, you know, emotional responses are separate than behavioral responses because they're all responses, but different parts of the brain light up and you see all these different responses in these different areas.
Yeah, what response that any animal engages in that isn't a behavior? I don't know.
We have not learned that yet.
Yeah. So yeah, that's basically what it does. It goes into the brain. It affects those regions, as you said, associated with emotional and sort of behavioral sexual actions. So the response is actually similar then to their behavioral response to sex pheromones, suggesting that it does affect, in a way, a similar process to that. Now, I'm given to understand that if they were to compare, like, it's not actually them seeking out sex. And so were they to pursue something that tasted good versus something that had that sort of sex hormone in it, they would prefer to go for something that tastes good. So it's not necessarily the sexual part of it per se that's important, but it seems to just have a similar effect in their brain. The sort of drive, if you will, sort of pushes forward this highly sort of, it's a little bit playful, a little bit aggressive. Like, I'm really interested in this thing right now. I don't know why. I don't know what it is, but I want it.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things that, like, when people think about like how brains work, I think it's very easy to assume that, like, you flip one switch and it's like, oh, there's my food switch. There's my sex switch. And like what you find is like a lot of the chemicals and the reward centers and all of those things are very similar and they overlap in a lot of different ways. So there's not like a singular switch. It's like kind of like this area is there and it just so happens that like some things,
network.
Yeah, some other variables and some other kind of like LinkedIn situations are lit up a little bit more than others. So,
you know what that reminds me of is when we did our ASMR episode and we talked about the fact that ASMR is not inherently a sexual thing and that people will get the sort of stimulation from the sounds and stuff. And that just sort of gives them the sort of the tingly spine sort of effect, if you will. Mm-hmm. And although some people do incorporate this into sort of sexual activities, it by itself is not necessarily a sexual activity. And I think there's a similar analogy here to how the cats seem to interact with catnip.
That's what I was getting at.
Oh, sweet. Great. Catnip is cat ASMR.
I love it. I love it. It's like ASMR for your nose, for your cat nose.
There you go.
Now, some other things I thought this was super interesting when you told me before when we were talking about this episode, and I thought this was really cool. This works with any type of cat. So, like picturing a lion or a tiger or a leopard or a puma or a lynx or a bobcat, or I can't think of any other cats.
Thundercat?
Thunder? Yeah, so it'd work with Lion-O. So, like, I guess maybe that's the thing. It's like all the villains of the Thundercats could have just used this and they would have been fine.
There you go. As I mentioned earlier, you actually can eat this. Catnip is safe for humans. It's been consumed in tea for its calming effect, sort of similar to chamomile. Our brains are different from cat brains, though, citation needed. So our reactions are different. Some herbalists will recommend catnip as a treatment for a variety of things, of which I'm not sure many have been empirically validated. But, you know, the stuff that is empirically validated is usually just medicine. But anyway, it has been validated for, or has been recommended for those things by herbalists. There's a whole list of them. Obviously, it's always a panacea, but mostly it includes inflammation. They recommend taking this mint herb thing for treating inflammation.
Yeah, interesting. It also works as a repellent for mosquitoes and other insects. So essentially, catnip is just citronella candles?
I mean, kind of. Although that's really bad for cats. I'm given to understand. So
okay,
yeah.
So yeah, citronella candle's bad. Catnip is fine.
Yeah, eat your catnip salad, and you will not be bugged by mosquito bugs.
Mosquito bugs.
All right, I think that's all I have. Anything else before we tap out on this one?
No, I think it's super fascinating. I never understood how catnip worked or like what it does. So like it's like super fascinating to kind of dive into it and thinking of like I guess if you want to stay safe in the safari or the jungle, you should probably carry like a big handful of like catnip, like Dale from King of the Hill does with his pocket dirt.
Isn't that like going into a forest full of grizzly bears with like a pocket full of bacon?
Oh yeah, I guess it's probably a bad idea. Don't do that.
So
don't trust me on outdoor survival stuff. I'm not Bear Grylls.
You don't want the like sexual intrigue of a panther while you're walking through the.
Yeah, you want to avoid these big cats. You don't want to make them horny too.
Attract them, like them growling and batting at you and laying on you is gonna hurt. Tremendously.
Yeah. It's gonna give you some stitches.
Okay, this has been Shane's bad advice. Thank you for listening to our catnip mini. I think that's all I got. So this is Abraham.
This is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.